This flip video is going to go back a little bit in terms of what we've been looking at and studying this unit. So far we've been getting bits and pieces along the way, and I think after this flip video you'll start to be able to put all of those pieces together and create one big picture of the Cold War, at least the early years of the Cold War, like the 1940s and 1950s. First of all, I'm going to go back a couple of days and talk about the origins of the Cold War. The war was raging in 1945, but it looked as though the Allies were going to pull it out and win. So the leaders of these countries began to meet and discuss what was going to happen after the fighting ended. At the Yalta Conference, the United States and Great Britain convinced Joseph Stalin to hold free and open elections in the Eastern European lands the Soviet Union would get after the war. This is a big deal for the world because the Soviets didn't really believe in free and open elections. Well, as it turns out, it was too good to be true. At the next conference, this time at Potsdam, things changed. First of all, President Roosevelt had died, and Harry Truman became president. He was much tougher with Stalin than Roosevelt had ever been. Second, between Yalta and Potsdam, Stalin became aware that the United States had developed an atomic bomb. This really angered Stalin. Third and final, Stalin broke the promise he had made at Yalta, the promise to hold free and open elections in Eastern European lands following the war. Okay, once the war finally ended, the United States was in a weird but kind of cool place. We were the only ones who had an atomic bomb, so we were the lone superpower in the world for a few years. At this point, it was time for us, the Americans, to sort of rethink our role in the world. One of the first sorts of show of strength by the United States was a shift in foreign policy, specifically how we would handle the threat of communism. The Truman Doctrine, named after the president at the time, Harry Truman, stated that in situations where there was the possibility that a country might turn to communism, the United States would provide money and aid to those countries in order to keep them from actually turning to communism. The strategy we began to use was called containment. Containment was the idea that we would allow communism to stay where it already was. We wouldn't fight to get rid of it, but we were not going to let it spread any more than it already had. Containment. To be able to back up our policy of containment, we needed a plan. To be more precise, we needed the Marshall Plan. In 1947, Secretary of State George C. Marshall visited Europe. Remember, this is only 2 years after the Second World War had ended. While Marshall was in Europe, he saw firsthand just how bad a shape Europe was still in. And he was worried. Others were worried too. Pretty much all of Europe was in poverty. That poverty made people desperate. And remember what the desperate people of Germany did? They blindly followed Hitler to war. So Marshall comes home and he's worried that the poverty in Europe is going to turn various countries red, or communist. When we say something is red, all we mean is that it is communist. When Marshall explained to Congress that we needed to send money to Europe to aid their recovery from war, Congress hesitated. But in 1948, Czechoslovakia turned red, and immediately Congress established the European Recovery Act, better known as the Marshall Plan. When all was said and done, the Marshall Plan had sent $13 billion to European countries to help them rebuild from World War II. This is important, and I don't want you to miss the point. We waited to start helping out the countries in Europe that were poor and somewhat helpless, and Czechoslovakia, in that amount of time, turned to communism. Obviously, because of our American ideology, we didn't like this, and we were afraid it was the first instance of many countries abandoning democracy for communism. Remember, we didn't want communism spreading. Containment. That's what you need to know for tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to look at specific instances where the Truman Doctrine was used or was not used.